I think we're ready to start. This second session this afternoon will start with a video address by Pregs Govender, who is the Deputy Chair of South Africa's Human Rights Commission. We're going also to have Sheila Kammerer here on the panel, who will, the Ambassador of South Africa to Bulgaria, who will follow up on the video later on, discussing also South Africa's experience in facing the past. After that, the chair will take over. Mr. Dobroslav Dimitrov, the head of the Commission on Foreign Affairs and National Security in the Bulgarian Parliament. He will chair this very interesting session, which we see as a continuation of the discussion, of the last discussion before lunch. This would be also the opportunity for all of you who didn't have the chance to ask the questions, to share their opinions, to do so. We're all very excited to hear more, so enjoy.
Thank you to the Sophia platform for inviting me to contribute to your dialogue with revolutionaries from North Africa and the Middle East committed to non-violence. My name is Pregs Govender, and I serve as the Deputy Chair of South Africa's Human Rights Commission. I am humbled to share a slice of our transition from revolution to democracy. During our transition, women united across political and racial divides into a national coalition. We mobilized around the future we dreamed of, a country where all had access to land, housing, water, an end to violence in its homes, streets, and workplaces. After the first democratic elections in 1994, MPs elected included over 100 women, most of whom had fought against apartheid. We helped ensure a constitutional legislative framework held globally for advancing human rights, especially socioeconomic rights and gender equality. Our country established critical democratic institutions such as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, our Constitutional Court, and the South African Human Rights Commission. We ratified many human rights conventions, including the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Simultaneously, South Africa signed a number of trade, finance, security, and economic agreements which undermine human rights. Today, South Africa still has high levels of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Economic and geographic apartheid still characterize our landscape and the lived experience of millions of South Africans. There is a direct line between the cause of poverty and the greed for wealth. Globally, power has shifted from the state to non-state actors, including powerful corporations and multilateral organizations. State actors often collude with or are corrupted by those who hold real economic power, as in South Africa's infamous arms deal, which increased the GDP, the measure of growth, measuring the cost of war, ignoring contributions to peace, such as subsistence farming. The power of parliaments and governments diminished in the face of corporations such as FIFA, which made the biggest profit it had ever made anywhere in the world in our country. The question is, at whose cost? Who and what we value is reflected in budget choices, where the poor are often pitted against the poor for scarce resources, whilst massive resources are wasted on misplaced priorities. The lesson: hold both the corrupter and the corrupted to account. Mining companies, which made massive profits before leaving South Africa, did not clean up after themselves. So, for example, acid mine drainage has seeped into our water, land, and people's bodies. The rights of capital often trumps the rights of people. Whilst capital goes in search of cheapest labor and maximum profits, women travel in search of survival as migrant workers, often in care work, the least valued and protected of jobs. Everything from water to people's bodies to entire countries' economies have been reduced to chips in a casino. There is little regulation or control. The result of such unregulated greed is the global financial crisis. The opportunity today is to connect the dots as you in North Africa have shown, demanding both an end to local dictators and an end to unemployment. In the early years of our democracy, the general agreement in trade and tariffs caused massive job losses, especially amongst women clothing workers who, unemployed, have no protection from the labor laws they fought for. They have become informal workers, the working poor, their children victim to gangs, drug addiction, and trafficked into prostitution. This year, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, head formerly of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, proposed a wealth tax to address the obscene disparity between rich and poor. We are whole, not fragmented human beings. Our rights are universal, indivisible, and equal. The governments we elect into power have a duty to protect and implement those rights, in recognition that dignity is integral to every single one of us. I wish you well in this conference, in this dialogue. May you protect the dreams of your non-violent revolution. I thank you.
Okay, is it working? Yes. Okay, dear Mr. President, Your Excellencies, dear guests, good afternoon and welcome back from lunch. I hope you had the necessary break so we can continue with this very important topic that we have ahead of us. I believe that dealing with the past goes straight to actually how we deal with the past, what kind of institutions we set up to deal with the past. It's an important question to answer, and I wouldn't dare to take time of our excellent panelists today, but I would personally like to share a personal experience that I had from the beginning of this year, when on the floor of Bulgarian Parliament for the first time in 22 years, a declaration was initiated by the current majority, which was to set the political will to close the page of the past, to break with the ties of the security forces of the previous regime. I have to underline on this, 22 years later, we were having a hard time passing a declaration on the topic. We were met with a fierce opposition from various circles. And the only reason this was possible to be passed was because the current majority is, by a large percentage, made up of young people from a new generation that has not much of memory of the past. Therefore, they had much clearer way of seeing forward rather than backward. That was even one of my colleagues here is the head of the European Affairs Committee in Parliament, who was alongside me when we had to deal with this. I have to say very happily that the declaration was passed with an overwhelming majority at the end, even though the fierce opposition, over 2/3 of Parliament voted for, and only one party didn't participate. So I have to underline this, how hard it is to break with the past, how hard it is to close the page. In my speech in the defense of this declaration, this is exactly what I said, that it's ridiculous that 20 years later, somebody standing and on the floor of Parliament defending such a declaration. This should have been done 20 years ago. And the only reason it should be done today, so someone doesn't have to do it 20 years later again. So this is my opening of the discussion, and I would like to give the word to Mrs. Kammerer, since this is the logical continuation, since that's how we started. So, Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dimitrov, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, of course. I just want to make a couple of words of introduction, following on from what Preg's Governor said. Before I get into the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the report of which is sitting on the table in front of me. Now, don't worry, Mr. Dimitrov, this is a 5-volume report, but I will try and stick to my 10 minutes. Right, South Africa made the transition from the discriminatory and oppressive system of apartheid to full democracy without a revolution. Although during the dying days of apartheid, there were a variety of severe disruptions to normal life, and events such as bombs going off in shopping malls at key national key points such as power stations. There were secret cross-border raids by our defence force, assassination of anti-apartheid activists in neighbouring countries and in our own, causing massive financial and economic sanctions, huge damage to South Africa's economy. There were protests and so on, but never a revolution or anything amounting to a civil war or an armed insurrection. To illustrate the point, just in an aside, about the damage to our economy, at the time of our first democratic election in 1994, South Africa's GDP totaled only $60 billion US dollars. Today, it is in excess of $360 billion US dollars. So democracy has been good for our economic development. Much of the credit for our peaceful political settlement must be given to the wise leadership of our country at that time by Presidents Mandela and de Klerk, both of whom were deservedly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. I had the privilege of working closely with both men. Mr. de Klerk, the outgoing president in 1994, is a canny pragmatist who fortunately could see the bigger picture. President Nelson Mandela, in his everyday dealings with people, is truly as saintly as he appears. It would be impossible for me to go into detail about those early days of our constitutional negotiations in the few minutes at my disposal. But I would like to highlight one aspect, because Pregs Govender mentioned it, and it's something important for her, and that is the role of women in this process. This may not be an issue for Bulgaria with its communist past, where gender equality was practiced at least in the workplace, but it is certainly an issue in Africa, both north and south, where gender equality is an issue in both Muslim and tribal societies. I see the issue being written a lot about lately in relation to the possible constitutional outcomes of the Arab Spring in Tunisia, Libya and Egypt, not to mention Syria, particularly as it affects women. The South African constitution had mothers as well as fathers only because the women of South Africa put up a fight for this. And when the ANC, African National Congress, the current ruling party, returned from exile in 1990-91, some of whom have seen how in post-colonial democracies in Africa, women had almost been excluded. They got together with women from other political parties and formed the Women's Coalition across party lines to lobby for women's participation and women's rights in the negotiation process. And that is how I met Pregs Govender in 1992. We were both members of the Women's Coalition, which she ran as manager. We were then both elected to the new Democratic Parliament in '94, and although we were from different parties, we usually agreed with each other, at least around women's issues. Pregs Govender is not a conformist, and she always took an independent line, as I think you could hear today, from her own party leadership on a number of issues. For instance, the delay in supplying antiretroviral drugs to AIDS patients because of our former President Mbeki's denialism and government corruption around the arms deal in South Africa. I would like to then proceed to mention certain things about our Truth Commission. South Africa's achievement of a political peaceful settlement to end apartheid is often held up as the way to go for societies emerging from an oppressive system of government and societies that are striving to achieve a democratic system. The AU and South Africa, the African Union, and South Africa were urging a roadmap towards an inclusive political settlement on Colonel Gaddafi and Libya, even as NATO was bombing his arsenals. This is because this is our own experience of the way to go. The protagonists of South Africa's negotiated settlement from all sides rejected the Nuremberg-style trials option on the basis that if apartheid was to be defeated at the negotiating table, there could not be such trials. Negotiations were unlikely to begin, let alone succeed, if the outgoing regime knew they faced criminal trials once they'd given up power. Just on the I'd like to mention lustration, because it was a topic dealt with in the previous panel. Lustration was was rejected, actually, in the course of our Truth Commission, on the basis that it would, we were a very divided society and we wanted to reconcile with each other. But all parties, all political parties, and 19 of them took part in the negotiations, were urged not to put those who had committed political crimes or crimes with a political motive, shall I say, into positions of power. And that actually worked very well. Most political parties who had been negotiating with each other to reach the settlement for some years abided by that approach. So that was quite useful. But I want to be the first to say here that one size does not clearly fit all when it comes to African regime change. Tunisia's ruler fled to avoid sanction, and it seems a very successful election ensued. The army forced Egypt's ruler to step down after sustained violent protests, but even though very ill, the former dictator has been subject to a show trial, which is not the way we went. Although, happily, Egypt's new election process seems to be going very well. And then the heir apparent of Colonel Gaddafi, the rest of the family fled or was killed, faces a trial for genocide at The Hague. Elections seem to be still some way off in Libya, and we're watching that space with great interest. So clearly the overthrow of oppressive regimes in North Africa were different in each case. South Africa chose the path of moral accountability for crimes against humanity and other horrendous offences against a whole nation. How you achieve this is the key issue. South Africa sought this moral accountability for apartheid crimes through granting amnesty for crimes committed for political motives based on confronting our recent past and truth-telling before our Truth and Reconciliation Commission, with the emphasis in this case on reconciliation. It was predicated on two things. Firstly, there was a post-amble to the interim constitution that was negotiated as part of a political settlement in 1993, which took 3 years, this negotiation, prior to holding democratic elections. And this provided that amnesty would be granted for criminal acts in terms of a certain mechanism, which turned out to be the Truth Commission. The parameters of this were negotiated in Parliament once the Democratic Parliament was elected in 1994. I was a member of the parliamentary committee which drafted the Truth Commission legislation, and I must say it was a very tough negotiation that took more or less a year in Parliament. Among one of the issues that arose, which would interest the lawyers here, is whether it was possible to shoulder collective guilt for crimes with a political motive, i.e., could a general shoulder guilt on behalf of the troops under him? The decision was no in our case. Each individual had to admit guilt and tell the truth in order to get amnesty individually. The first meeting of South Africa's Truth Commission took place on the 16th of December 1995 at Bishop's Court in Cape Town, the official residence of the chairman of the Commission, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The report, which, as you see, runs to 5 volumes, was presented to then President Nelson Mandela just under 3 years later on the 29th of October 1998. I just want to mention a few brief details about the Commission. There were 17 commissioners. It had 3 committees. Firstly, the Human Rights Violations Committee. This was where victims could, in public, tell their story to the commissioners. One of the most important things about our Truth Commission is that it was totally transparent. Every single session of any committee was held in public. The media were able to attend, as were members of the public. The victims had to get themselves inscribed on a list in order to appear before the Human Rights Violations Committee. There were other reasons for this, which I'll mention. There were several thousand victims who, over this period, for at least a year and a half to 2 years, told their story in the full blaze of publicity. Then there was the Amnesty Committee, on which judges sat, and some of the commissioners who were judges, and they heard applications from those who committed crimes with a political motive for amnesty. About 100 of these were granted, and a handful only of applications were not granted, because there was a total disproportion between the horrendous crime and the political motive. Some people were sentenced in the normal court procedures, and some of these people are in jail today. But the normal court procedures applied in their case once they were. And then the third committee was the Reparations Committee. And there the victims who had told their stories before the Human Rights Violations Committee could apply for reparation. This took various forms. In the end, it became one of the most difficult things to deal with. And the government decided there was the Nelson Mandela Fund, which was established to pay these reparations. They decided to pay every single victim a small amount, which amounted to about 6,000 to 7,000 lev. But in addition, all those who were injured in the course of crimes or assaults by the apartheid government were given, for instance, rehabilitation if they were crippled, if they were bankrupted, they were assisted with housing, their children were educated, and so on. So the Reparations Committee did a great deal of very good work. I just want to say this, the second notion on which the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was predicated was the dignity of each individual. The notion of dignity, and it's been mentioned in the other panels here today, but the notion of dignity resides at the very heart of our constitutional settlement in South Africa and is fundamental to our Bill of Rights. It's implicit in the right to equality, it is assumed within the right of political association, in our freedom of speech, in our freedom of movement. How can we have dignity if we cannot go where we wish, say what we want, or join with others who share our passions and our dreams? Along with equality, freedom and justice, dignity is one of our most important principles. Apartheid stripped away dignity. Voting in the first real election in 1994 gave some of it back. The first clause of our Constitution states that human dignity is one of our founding values. The Truth Commission was South Africa's own novel way of dealing with its traumatic past, and it gave our country the opportunity to come to terms with the past and provide the foundation for rebuilding the country on the basis of a human rights culture, the reconstruction of South Africa's society on the basis of a shared vision, and also based on the need for understanding, not for vengeance, and for reparation rather than retaliation, and for Ubuntu, which is an indigenous South African word much used by us today, which basically means human kindness. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Carr. Before I give the floor to the next panelist, I'd like to make a comment that actually I believe you really found the right name for your committee, the Truth and Reconciliation. You cannot move forward unless you have reconciled with your past. Usually people react emotionally after a change in the regime that you need to do something extreme, but it doesn't work that way, because to the next day you have to live with these people. You have to actually be able to continue. Life continues. So that's the reality. We need to uncover, reconcile, and move on. And that's one of the hardest things to do. So I believe this was actually a very good choice for a name. Okay, next is Mr. Metodiev. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I will speak in English. Thanks a lot, of course, to the chairman, but also to the organizers. As you understood quite well, probably the problem about reconciliation with the past is still quite debatable in Bulgarian society as well, 25 years after the beginning of Bulgarian transition, and which is, I would say, worse. Unlike South African example, the case is that Bulgaria is mostly quoted, and still we feel themselves as a kind of a negative example. Meaning that the feeling of Bulgarian public is that Bulgarian transition was not just, it was not fair. Of course, there are a lot of conspirational theories. Some of them are, can be proved somehow, others cannot. Yesterday someone mentioned the example of Spain. Why don't we just burn the archives of the state security? Bulgaria is a very good example why we shouldn't do that. What I'm trying to do, and what I will try to present, is to answer to the question why Bulgarian state security even benefited from the transition, which is widespread feeling in the Bulgarian public. And secondly, why it is very important the process of declassification of the archives of the state security is important factor for the success of the transition and for feeling of just fair transition. So my approach will be a little bit sociological, meaning that in the first part I will say a few words what was the situation of state security before, during the communist period, and then what happened with state security after, in the beginning of transitional process. We are doing right now a project reading the archives of the last days of the state security, meaning after 1989 through the 1990. And it is very interesting to look and to read how state security abstracted the ideas for declassification of the archives, because the first attempt to open those archives was made in the 1990, but it didn't happen. It failed. So the problem with state security in the communist period is that it had several important characteristics, apart from torturing people, apart from preventing them to having a good career. The problem, at least to my understanding, is that state security was a kind of a social elevator. And it's not a problem that it was social elevator, it was the problem that it was hidden social elevator, meaning that not everyone knew where was that elevator. Meaning that state security and state security services, they were able to influence people not only in a negative but also in a positive way. But it was a kind of a deal with the devil, we can put it like this. Meaning that, of course, they wanted something on the other side. They needed and they wanted some collaboration from those people. The other important factor, reading today the archives of the state security, which what is making more and more clear, is that state security contributed significantly to a very great extent to the disintegration of the community. I would say even disintegration of the communities. Meaning that every professional community, small community, it doesn't matter local or professional, it was infected, we can say directly, infected by this poison. Because there were people who were following other people. They were doing their reports. Those reports were put on paper. Then those reports were read by someone. And then all sorts of rumors, gossips, bad information about people part of this community were spread intentionally or non-intentionally. But still this information existed and it was readable and spread. But another important, also another important aspect of the function of the state security in our countries, it was that it was under political control. Meaning that those were special services, but they served the Communist Party. So it was there was a Communist Party which controlled the special services, and they were serving the purposes of the Communist Party. So what happened after the beginning of transition, again from this, let's say, sociological approach? Why state security even profited from the transition. The main reason is this removal of political control, because in the beginning of Bulgarian transition, in the early stage of Bulgarian transition, in Bulgaria never happened legal lustration, but it happened a kind of a public lustration, meaning that in the early stage of Bulgarian transition, the Communist Party and especially the elite of Communist Party, it was removed from the power, not only on a central level, but also on a local level. Personally talking, party secretaries who were very powerful in the communist period, they were removed from their offices and they were removed from their influence, which of course was good. But the problem is that when they were removed from the power and when the archives remained classified, the power went to the, I'm calling this, it went to the experts. In the early period of Bulgarian transition, it was very modern to talk about, let's have an expert government. Politicians are bad people, so why don't we have expert government? So removing this political control from administration, from businesses, from companies especially, the power went to the experts. And those were the experts, which became clear right now with declassification of the archives. Those experts, they were the state security people. And Mr. Dimitrov mentioned the latest problem with regard to the state security in Bulgaria. It was reveal of the dossier commission that 50% of Bulgarian ambassadors during the transitional period, they collaborated to the state security. And especially the foreign ministry is extremely good example for this argument, that the power went from the politicians to the experts. We can say it even more directly, meaning that state security people in the communist period, they were not allowed to pursue political career. Right now, of course, they're allowed. And here is the main problem, the main source of conspiratorial theories in Bulgaria, because there's such a feeling that this network of state security people, when they were not serving anymore to the Communist Party, they started to serve to themselves. It was, we can say, this network of state security was privatized. It was privatized for private needs. And this network, which was not, I don't want I don't want to look like being conspiratorial. There is no grand conspiracy. This wouldn't be fair to say at all. But there were a network, there was one big network and many small networks which they were trying to influence the process which was going on in the society, in a society which was with disintegrated communities and disintegrated communities. So finally, what kind of conclusion could we draw from Bulgarian experience, and from that point of view, of course? The first one is that lustration, of course, from my point of view, it's not a bad thing. It's something good to be done. But if you lustrate only the politicians and you don't lustrate the state security, the secret people, this is a problem. And then, as a consequence of that, you cannot make illustration without declassifying the archives. Because without declassifying the archives, you have no idea who to illustrate. And finally, talking about reconciliation, actually our idea dealing with the past, reading of the archives, our aim, our task is to rebuild, to reconstruct the communities, but also to reconstruct the community which was that much shaken by the state security. And I don't want to sound pessimistic, just the opposite. Usually I'm presenting optimistic points of view, and that's my idea about the process. Although our experience was not very positive, still, even 22 years after the beginning of Bulgarian transition, there is a need to be done, this dealing with the past, and I'm sure that it will be done. Thank you very much.
you, Mr. Metodiev. The fact is that enough time has passed that the historical view of events becomes more and more relevant, and it's much easier to actually measure. It's hard to put a judgment on something that's happened a year or two ago, but when enough time has passed, historians become much more objective, and the ability of them to judge the situation much greater. I would like the way to work it is basically to have our panelists present their positions and then open up the floor. So I'll move on to Mrs. Orsaci, who actually is a true scholar of transitional justice, which is basically what we've been speaking about, exactly how we deal with this, which comes exactly through that, the legal procedures and how we deal with that. So.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very high call that you placed on me, and I'm such important issues, such important questions have been raised here. The time frame, for instance. Must we act under the passion of the revolution? Passions are good in politics, and justice must be done as fresh blood has been spilled. You cannot keep quiet when people died, when people fell in the streets. On the other hand, some things cannot be done, or can they, before a whole generation passes. As you mentioned, 20 years have passed before our respective states have declared communism as a criminal and illegitimate regime. This happened in 2006 in Romania. The president declared communism criminal and illegitimate. This is also a form of justice. I mean, a generation, I call that biological justice. After all, they lustrate themselves because they grow old and die. And this is a form of justice, isn't it? So sometimes passions, sometimes biology. And in between, we have all these shades of gray. Romania, the Romanian case. At the same time, Romanians have done everything. They crossed all the whole spectrum of possible political justice measures, except lustration. Lustration was never attempted in Romania. And at the same time, there are enormous flaws and things that have not been done. I will talk about trials, criminal justice. I will talk about administrative justice, meaning the opening of the files of the secret police, the Securitate in Romanian, and a little bit about symbolic justice, the Truth Commission that was created, and this declaration of the President. The trials, after all, the most spectacular and maybe the most efficient measure of transitional justice. When we say transitional justice, we think Nuremberg. A trial, we see the old president and the old tyrants in the place of the accused. We see them put to justice, to trial. Trials play many roles. Of course, the role of distributing justice, of punishing the guilty, of restoring, of retributive justice. This is the term. But also they fulfill a very important role, the epistemic role of the trials. They tell a story. They tell the official story. Through the voice of the judge, the state itself speaks. It doesn't mean that this is history, but it means the official story. What happened? What was the nature of the regime? What was the nature of the crimes? And what happened? And in Romania, we had a violent extrication path. More than 1,000 people died. More than 80% of them died after the tyrant has fled, after he has given up power. Who has killed them? We would have expected these trials, because there were many trials about these events, to at least illuminate us in this respect. They did it only halfway. So the trials in Romania, hundreds of trials literally, were only concerning the revolution. 45 years of communist crimes were reduced to those 7 days of shooting, and out of these 7 days we were only talking about the first 3 before Ceausescu fled. Whoever shot in Bucharest and killed about 800 people. We still don't know 20 years after. There is a cemetery of revolutionary heroes in Bucharest, and apparently people who have shot each other lay there together, united in death. Victims and perpetrators and mistakes and soldiers and civilians and young people and members of security forces. And we still don't know who should be there, who shouldn't be there. Well, there were generations of trials, since we are talking about time frames. All trials did not or should not maybe take place at the same time. We started with Ceausescu's trial. That was a revolutionary passion. 55 minutes of trial, quick and messy execution. It certainly had a cathartic effect, so it works on the short term. Shooting has stopped. People were strangely satisfied of this messy affair. The tyrant was dead and justice was done. In the long term, however, this modicum of justice has had an effect of hiding the huge state apparatus that has made all this crime possible. It obscured the responsibility of the communists, of the country, really. Who has shot Romanians in the street? We said the answer was literally Ceausescu. That one person. The trials that followed, who have, like in other cases, involved members of his family, his son, for example, or very close associates, have followed the same pattern. They were accused of genocide. This was an abuse of the term. Genocide was not what happened. The international definition of the term is formal, and it does not involve killing of political groups. But the image the state was trying to pass through these trials was Romanians were a victim of genocide, the supreme crime. Who creates the supreme victim? Victims of genocide cannot be guilty. So Romanians cannot be guilty for whatever happened to them. But, well, the passage of time helps temper these revolutionary passions. And if the country moves towards democracy, which may have or may not have been connected with the transitional justice. So if the country becomes democratic, the rule of law comes to the surface, like oil in water. No matter how much we stir, in time it comes up. So it did come to Romanian criminal justice as well, at length. The next generation of trial was involving the Communist Party. The whole political executive committee of the Romanian Communist Party, 24 people, were brought to justice to answer for not opposing Ceausescu when he was ordering shootings. They did not approve, but they did not say no. And the initial sentence was acquittal. They were acquitted. Of course, they were initially accused of genocide themselves. And of course, this kind of absurd accusation did not apply. But acquittal meant, the message sent was, the party was not responsible. The party was but a puppet at the hands of the tyrant. This was the history that was written by these courts. There was a public outcry. There was, even in 1990, even in the revolutionary years, this could not pass. So finally, at length, the trial was retrialed, and they were condemned to heavy prison sentences, and not for genocide, for aggravated murder, for complicity to aggravated murder. A legal name was given to the crime, which is also very important. How are the crimes defined? How can the law, how can criminal law help us understand what happened to us? So the responsibility of the party was shown. An institution was considered guilty for, at least for the revolution. And then another generation of trials were the trials of the military. And when I say military, I do not just mean the army, I also mean the special troops, the militia, and the Securitate troops. Securitate is an obsession of the Romanians, and I believe it is the case in every communist country and maybe in every dictatorship. The secret police, they're everywhere and they can do everything. They're like demigods. Well, in the first 6 years, it took 6 years, it took a change of political power for the army to be brought to justice. In the first 6 years, when the bulk of the trial was taking place, only the Securitate members were being involved. They shot, that's for sure, but the investigations have proven clearly the overwhelming responsibility of the army. They were the ones shooting people in the street. However, a sort of tacit immunity was granted to them. Why? Clearly because they had a sort of a pact with the new power, guarantees, they exchanged power against guarantees of immunity, but also I would say a more symbolic or state-building reason. You cannot, or at least in Romania, they didn't want to incriminate the army. This institution had to be preserved because the army is the people, the army is the nation. It's a pillar of our nation, the army. So if you, it's a quotation from the Ministry of Defense, if you attack the army, if you attack a general, you attack the army. If you attack the army, the nation will go astray. So the army was pictured as a victor in the fight with the dictatorship. That was the revolution. The whole nation fighting as one with the dictator, and the army fraternizing with the population. Certainly it happened, but there were 1,000 dead. How could we account for this? On the other hand, the Securitate was easy to hate. It was already done. So here we had the guilty party all found for us. It was pictured as an anti-national and criminal institution, which certainly it could have been, but to blame them for the 1,000 dead of the revolution was a lie. So this institution was sacrificed, so to speak. So far, we are in 1997, and we have two institutions responsible for the Romanian communism. The Romanian Communist Party and the Securitate. Both institutions were dismantled. And the next day after the revolution, they just disappeared. So it's kind of blaming a ghost for very real events. They were no longer threatening to the continuity of the state. You could blame the political party, you could blame Securitate. They did not exist anymore. After 1997, however, things have changed because the political power has changed. And who is in power matters, because political will. And the political will of the new power was, of course, to find the truth and justice, but also to delegitimize their political opponents. Politics goes this way, and let's not look how the sausages are done. So we are happy that these trials took place. We have seen generals on trial. Not only generals, but the Ministry of Defense was co-responsible for, and they had to pay millions and millions to the victims. Also important issues were finally being debated in court. The issue of the responsibility of a state institution. For the first time and the only time, a state institution, an existing state institution, was considered responsible for the Romanian communism, or at least a part of it, a bloody part of it. The issue of the moral responsibility of the military. Should the military obey orders, no matter what these orders are? And the court has stated, no, the militaries are moral agents. They have the obligation to evaluate the morality and the legality of an order. And also, a very important issue to the building of the democratic state was the role of the military forces in a democratic state. And they stated officially that the order to shoot demonstrators was an illegal order. The army should not be used as a peacekeeping force. Police is there to keep order in the streets. The army should only defend borders against foreign enemies. The army in the street is an illegal act. And this is such a foundational statement to be heard in the court of law. So did the Romanian trials fulfill their epistemic role? Did they tell us the story? It looks good. But also there was all this other half of the story which we never learned. They didn't show what happened in Bucharest, who killed these 800 people after Ceausescu has fled. So his orders were not valid anymore. Then why were they shooting? Who was ordering this to them? We don't know. And as Romanian, as Bulgarians, as maybe everyone, are very prone to conspiracy theories. We have wonderful conspiracy theories. Terrorists were shooting us. The upcoming president, Ion Iliescu, was shooting. Really, I even know of a very serious book, well, talking about extraterrestrial forces who would intervene. We still don't know what happened, and this is not proper state building. The very foundations of the state are undermined because we do not believe in the legitimacy of a state that we suspect has killed Romanians. And also, no trials about communism, about what happened for 45 years. No trial has been done, so yes, 3 days of killings to resume or to understand a whole pan of history. Am I running out of time? Yes, I am. Just 2 words on the administrative justice, and then the Truth Commission, well, it will just go unsaid. Romanians have opened their Securitate archives after 10 years. This is a very important issue. How much time has passed when the archives have been in the wrong hands? Because the archives have passed into the property of the Romanian intelligence service. Surely they claim to have been reformed and new a democratic force, but they are the secret services. And they had the archives for 10 years, plenty of time to, you know, clean it up, clean it by fire, and so forth. So the property, the possession of the archives is a key factor. I feel like saying, do pay attention to this factor, because we didn't see it going. We were busy focusing on other things, and we didn't think of who has them, who has these files. In 2000, finally, under international pressure and by shame, so to speak, we were the last country not to have done anything about it. A law was passed as to the opening of the archive and the creation of a council for studying their Securitate archives. It was a weak law. It didn't give the council the possession of the archives. The archives kept being into the custody of the secret services. So the council was making demands to the services who were passing files, if they found them, all quotation signs. So actually the political agenda of the secret services was dictating the pace of transitional justice in Romania, of administrative transitional justice. Also, the council was made up according to the political algorithm. The directors of the council were representatives of the parties in the parliament. Not members of parties, but they were being sent there by the parties. They were being perceived as politicians. And there is a wide mistrust in politics. They were negotiating disclosure. Can we negotiate justice? So they lost credibility. There were scandals, of course. There was press disclosure. There was tabloid. There was blackmail. So this power was taken from the council and given to courts. Only courts can decide if there was collaboration. Who should make transition?
Really weird.
The last question, who should make
Very
transition?
running out of time.
The courts or the politics or the politicians? Politicians, after all, are the nation themselves. We voted for them. They were also concentrated on collaborators, not on the officers, not on the Securitate people. So the guilty, finally, who was making the communist crimes? Again, the victims, the collaborators, who were sort of the victims. And I knew that I wouldn't have time to talk about the symbolic justice, but I am so waiting for questions. Thank you.
I understand you were very passionate about what your topic is, so it's understandable you ran out of time, but I believe you have time to go back on some of these, perhaps once we open the floor, so no harm done, I believe. Okay, I think it's always the way legal terms are looked at is interesting, so no better way to continue this by giving the floor to a professor in law. So,
and actually, thank you.
Balish, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation and for this nice event. And it's really a privilege for me to be here. Let me first express my deep appreciation to those who moved nations in Arab Springs, those who were brave enough to offer the highest sacrifice. And I should feel a bit ashamed because we didn't have it in Czechoslovakia that time, and I can still remember, and last night movie actually brought my memories back when I was in South Bohemia persuading people that there is nothing to be afraid of and they should really uphold them and start to fight for themselves. But it was, even if I had strange feeling behind, it was really peaceful and safe compared to what has happened in Arab countries, and I would say you are really brave guys, and it's really deserved the bow. But let me proceed. I just wanted to deal with challenge of transitional justice and to view it from a different angle, because there are pros and cons, of course, and there is no pattern that is possible to use, although we are very close, and some memories from Bulgarian movie were very intimate to me as well, because I felt it very similarly. So we are not that far, we are very close. But anyhow, I think what we still have to have in mind is that there are some boundaries, some limitations that are important, and we should really observe them. What's very important is what Prime Minister Jan Čarnogórsky mentioned in the morning, and it is legislative framework, and it's really a crucial requirement for reconciliation with our past, to not to repeat mistakes our predecessor made, not to do the thing in the way they did. And I think that the morality that has been mentioned should be part of the law as well. And by chance, it has the address of Dr. Čarnogórsky provoked me, and I just remembered that it's not new to have morality in the legislation and requirement to set up rules for people. And I really found a document from 1780 before Christ, which is Hammurabi Code. And in prologue, let me quote, it is said, "Then Anu and Bel called by name me, Hammurabi, the exalted prince, who feared God, to bring about the rule of righteousness in the land, to destroy the wicked and the evildoers, so that the strong should not harm the weak." So I think it is Hammurabi. The issue is, of course, how it was meant, what was the notion of justice that time, what was the practical practical moves made by Hammurabi, but still the morality was accompanying law that time as it should even now. That's why I think, except the legislative framework, and in Czechoslovakia, as it was mentioned, the crucial moments were adopting Bill of Rights, and of course also interconnecting Czech internal or Czechoslovak legal order with international one. So except these issues, there was another issue that was important, and was really fostering the rule of law, and especially basic safeguards of fairness and justice. I understand that in revolutionary era, sometimes people are angry and they feel that the best thing they can do is to shut down those who oppress them. But in effect, I understand that many people have been oppressed, but still we should also reconcile our memory and consciousness, and try to tell ourselves how we have contributed to the system that has really oppressed us then, why we have allowed it, and could we do more that time or not. So there are really internal or external influences on us. It was not that easy, but still we cannot really blame only those whom we allowed to do what we didn't like. And it is important then why we should take into consideration issues like just, fair process, and that's, I think, this is really the limiting line between retributive justice and vengeance, and it should be really probably taken as one important point that, from which we should not deflect anyhow. So this is, actually I will not probably repeat what is within the notion of fair process, and I think what is important is not only to leave countries in transition to themselves. It is good to open door and tell them that there is some standard of human rights protection at the international plane. There are many regional and sub-regional organizations with their own notions that are slightly shifted, but generally copy the general pattern. And just to tell them, if you want to deal with your past in a decent way, you should also look at these documents. And I think since we are running out of time, I've got my 7 pages presentation ready. I would like to stop here and allow discussion about these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bausch. Very kind of you to try to save our panel timeline. Okay, I think we've seen a lot of different views, and yet we all speak about the same thing. I'll give a parallel with Romania, which is our neighbor under the same communist regime, yet power changed. We didn't have a single shot fired in Bulgaria, where they had the actual revolution there. They handled it differently with the court trials and so forth, and however, at the end, we end up with the same problem. We're ending up speaking about where the files are, who controls the files, hidden networks, and so forth. So I believe, regardless of the transitional way that it happened, the state regime, whether it's communist or fascist or something else called, I looked, Mr. President, your book you had on the back there, where these regimes are all the same. It doesn't matter what we call them. So I believe this is the real issue, and I think it can be helpful to share information. So with this, I open the floor to everyone. Yes, Miss, right over there. I'm sorry. I don't know, with the microphone, if you can be a bit quicker. Okay.
Thank you. That was very helpful, but it raised a couple of questions. The Romanian experience is a little bit similar to what's going on now in Yemen in terms of accountability. My question is, when there are two approaches within the opposition itself, the first approach is to reach to the killer, the person who has been responsible or in charge of killing the people on the streets in the name of solving the crisis. And then there's the other approach that insists on accountability and building a new state on right basis, no matter how many people we lose. How do you try to deal with the two approaches that start to struggle among the opposition itself in a very critical time while the regime is trying to kill whoever goes on the street? My second question is, when an army, half of the army joins a revolution, and they join the revolution in the name of protecting it, even though the general of that army has been the partner of the president that the revolution is against. And then you have the double standards of a person who was involved in killing a lot of people and violations for the past 30 years now became part of the revolution. Do you wait until the revolution succeeds in order to ask for accountability for his own crimes, or you scream out loud and say that you don't want a killer among you right now? Do you wait or do you do it later? Thank you.
It's a very good question. I suggest we can pick up a few more so we can be a bit more efficient. I'm sorry, there was a lady with the green there, then you man over there. Yeah, we'll collect about 3 questions and then continue. Go ahead. No, sorry.
My question is on behalf of the Syrian opposition in Bulgaria. The revolution in Syria is ongoing. Every day we are watching it and it's going on. My question is to everyone, to all panelists, but I'll be most interested in Mrs. Ursaci's opinion. When there are 22 million population in Syria, state security is between 400,000 and 500,000 agents and collaborators of the state security, and the archives are now being burned up and destroyed in any possible way. Then, if all these methods we heard of do not work in Syria, and we know that the situation is unique there, and how there is a threat of civil war knocking on the door, so to say, where do you see the solution to this unique problem, and can you make recommendations to us in order to create stable foundations for democracy, which we hope we'll be able to build soon? Thank you.
سؤال فقط للسيدة المتدخلة من رومانيا تحدثت.
My question is to the representative of Romania. She talked about the need to establish the exact number of the killed Romanian citizens. Hasn't this question been discussed? What about the autopsy of the courses in order to see what type of weapons the state security or the army used in order to have more evidence, more tangible proof with respect to the crime perpetrated by the state security or the army?
The floor first to the panelists to have these questions, and I'll ask colleagues if you can be as short as possible, because you can see there is a lot of interest for more questions. I believe it seems like all 3 of them were from Mrs. Ursuci, perhaps?
Oh, yes.
I'm not sure if you'd like to. Okay, then I think it's the first question, isn't it?
Yeah, but later.
Yes, do not leave me alone in that.
Okay, well, you should
see,
then go ahead and answer the first question then, so we can keep
No,
in
I
order.
think it was the second, the lady, it was her second question about, you know, the head of the army, when all these awful deeds are being perpetrated, what do you do them? The South African delegation that went to Chile to study the Chilean Truth Commission situation in 1994 were amazed to find that the wicked old Pinochet was still the head of the army. So the head of state, who perpetrated allegedly all these wicked things, was the head of the army, and there was a new Liberal Party, democratically elected president, but they were coexisting. So I think it's just impossible to generalize. It was their solution. It worked for them for a period. Then Mr. Pinochet was out of office and died. But I mean, for their transitional arrangement, they had to do that for some reason. Yeah. Sorry, just to mention.
No, this is exactly who, because the backgrounds are different. I would imagine that first order needs to be preserved and then move on to justice, because if anarchy breaks out, then everyone will be hurt. So I can imagine the reason for that. So, yes, Ms. Sursuch.
Such high calls. Well, the first question, it's really, I think, a very philosophical question that has preoccupied humanity since Aristotle, really. Am I being heard? Should we have substantive justice, or should we have procedural justice, or should we peace or justice? Sometimes we have to make this choice. And I believe this can answer the question about Syria. Peace or justice? What would you choose for your countries? It's really Sophie's choice, isn't it? Which one of these children do you choose to sacrifice? Maybe we can find a way not to sacrifice either, to build peace without going on with blatant lies. But yes, the answer is really politics. Vigilance, open eyes, awareness. It is such a difficult journey to embark in. No one will be innocent at the end of it. No matter what choices we make every day, at the end of the journey we are exhausted, I believe. I have spent my, youth wondering about these days that I witnessed as a child in the streets of Bucharest. And the world was so clear back then, and I was so proud of my nation that has sacrificed as heroes, as you say. Not anymore. And I don't know what to choose between peace and justice. I think I would pick peace, really, peace above all, even if it means further victimizing those families of those victims. But it's such a hard answer to give.
And
yes.
The third question, I think that was the first. I believe we got the second. So
and the second, you know, fiat justitia pereat mundus, be it justice even if the world comes to an end. Would we make this choice? That's why I'm not a politician. These kind of... Do we have other choices? Yes, please, do tell me.
I don't know. I don't think so.
You mentioned morals and substantive justice, and you mentioned rule of law.
Yeah.
Can we have both?
I would like to. Yeah.
And if we have to choose, which one would we choose? Rule of law or substantive justice?
You cannot separate it, I think.
No, you can't.
Oftentimes you have a choice.
I don't think this question will get its answer right now, so I'd prefer to move on to the next.
It's just the third question that, about the corpses.
Quickly,
Investigations have been conducted, and I believe the truth is known. We know where the bullets came from, we know who the weapons belong to, we do not know who gave the orders, which was the plan, and who is responsible for these bullets. We cannot say that the soldiers shooting were responsible, the generals giving orders were responsible. But so far, it is presented as being a chaos, and it was chaos. Everyone was shooting all around, all over. Weapons were given to civilians, and when this happens, chaos ensues. So weapons to civilians, No.
Okay, I'll take the questions now from this side of the...
Just a short comment on the third question.
Okay.
Short comment on the question about the archives. In Bulgaria, during this period of 20 years before opening of the archives, there was a very strong argument which stated directly, we don't need to open the archives because the archives, they don't exist at all. They were burned down, which became clear that it's not true. So, of course, part of them were destroyed. That's true. But still there's substantial evidence in those archives that can reconstruct the whole history of the communist regime. So, of course, it's possible. I'm not saying that they don't destroy the archives. Possibly they're doing that. But still, this is a myth which serves very well the old regime, if I could say.
Okay, I'll take this time from this side. Yes, sir. Go.
لي ملاحظة سأتحدث بالعربية. بما أننا في جلسة البحث عن
I have a remark. We are looking for a solution, how to resolve problems. I do not fully agree that reconciliation is the one and only way, because for a couple of days, for several days, how can we achieve reconciliation after 40 or 50 years of problems and repression and lack of justice? Of course, every experience is relative. I also mean the experience of South Africa. Of course, when the foundations are clear, the principles are clear, it's different. So my question is, do you have objective, impartial criteria that would guarantee that reconciliation would lead to uncovering this disclosure of truth, regardless of anything else? My second question, we do live in similar conditions as what you spoke about in Romania. There were shootings on the Tahrir Square. Several thousands were killed. There was torture before that year, for years, and after that, many people were killed because of this torture. My question is how we can look for accountability from the dictator. Is the judiciary independent enough to be able to offer such a trial, such a process? I'm a member of the Committee for Protection of the Families Victims to the Mubarak's regime. We live in revolutionary times and revolutionary attitude. People insist on quick resolution, but sometimes this may lead to a cancellation of proof and evidence that can help us sentence the dictator. So my question is whether your judiciary during the trial against your dictator was independent enough, or there was pressure exerted on it.
Уважаеми дами и господа,
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to say a few words on transition as a representative of the Union of the Repressed People in Bulgaria after 1945. I've heard a lot about transition, and I would like now to hear from our guests from the Arab world how they would not apply the transition that happened in Bulgaria. Why the transition in Bulgaria did not happen the way the democratic forces wanted it to be Well, because in the very beginning, following the 10th of November 1989, in the very group of the Union of Democratic Forces and other opposition parties, former members of the Communist Party were infiltrated in mass, and there was an order of the Communist Party saying that that members of their families, young people, should join the Union of Democratic Forces and other opposition parties. So what happened? They impeded the application of law in Bulgaria because they did not want it such a transition. And it was so because the records were not opened and the Illustration Act was not voted the way it happened in the Czech Republic and other ex-socialist country. That allowed the former collaborators of the state security to hide many of the files of the records. And I was really surprised that the person who was a vice president, General Samerjiev, hid and in fact destroyed thousands of files, became a vice president of President Zhelev. That's why I want to ask, how did it come that General Samerjiev, who destroyed the records, the files in Bulgaria, became the second most important political person in Bulgaria? And still, the records of the Communist Party have not been opened, declassified, and there is where the truth lies, because that's where we will find how orders were imposed on the lower levels of employees and party officials, because it was the Politburo, the political bureau that took all decisions. And that's how this slow transition led to today's events in Bulgaria. I would have been very happy if the Prime Minister was still here to listen to me, because I'm convinced that what is happening right now in Bulgaria is to probably 70% still conducted by former collaborators and agents of the state security. This must be known by our government, because we are not moving in the right direction, and we, from the Union Association of the Repressed People, will lead to a negative outcome. Thank you for your attention.
I apologize. And I would like to address Mrs. Ursace and tell her that in a Solomon's way, but very naive, is to say, to talk about biological justice, the way the victims die, the same way their killers die as well. Mrs. Kammerer talks about truth and reconciliation. Yes, the gentleman from Libya expressed his doubts for the extent, the level of reconciliation. But this is the only way for all of us joined together, united together, to stride forward. United, the Bulgarian people repressed by communism have been writing letters to the Bulgarian parliament. The date, the 9th of September 1944, we want to announce as a day of national mourning and Bulgarian reconciliation. What do we mean under reconciliation? For us, it's mostly humility, and we want the killers to acknowledge their guilt in front of the Bulgarian people, to acknowledge the crimes they committed against the Bulgarian people. And I'm not even talking about the transition. The transition was directed in such a way Bulgarian democracy was born, was created in the laboratories of the state security. And I want this to be known by everybody. As the repressed at the moment do not have a club, we had a premise. We had premises in Bulgaria, but it was taken away from us, the only place we had in Bulgaria. And because our membership fee is 20 € a month, and because we cannot pay the rent for this place, it was taken away from us. I wish the struggling, the fighting Arab world and our friends from the Middle East to believe in themselves, to find strength in themselves, and to learn from our mistakes in the past. And I want to ask President Zhelev, how did it happen that the longest suffering political prisoner in the world was forgotten, Ilya Minev, and the second one, Vasil Vazunchetu from Chirpan? As far as I know, Mr. Nelson Mandela has 25 years of being imprisoned, with all my due respect, but please, I would like President Zhelev to answer. President Zhelev, would you like to answer this question? We are changing a little bit the course. 27 years Nelson Mandela was imprisoned. When people from the state security were talking that state security created the Union of Democratic Forces, and when other people are saying that the political bureau of the Bulgarian Communist Party created the Union of Democratic Forces, I understand it, but people who've been in the prisons, in the political camps, I cannot stay silent. I created the Union of Democratic Forces. I united all restituted parties which were banned by the communist regime in 1944. These are 1947. These are the Social Democrats, Nikola Petkov, the Agricultural Party, the Radical Democrats, and also the various civil organizations with ecological subjects, with different human rights as their focus. So I believe I myself am the creator and the initiator of the establishment of the Union of Democratic Forces. So it's nonsense really to say that the state security created this union, and it's also quite offensive. I very recently spoke to somebody who was in prison for a long time for political reason, and it seems that the journalist who was interviewing him was directing his answers in a way which is convenient for the Socialist Party. They asked him, how were the decisions taken at the round table? And he answered, at the round table, the decisions were actually taken under the table. How is that possible? When the round table was shown, it was broadcast on the radio and television, and the people stopped working. Transport stopped functioning at 3 o'clock. People could not believe their eyes and ears that actually the Communist Party, for which 45 years it was spoken that it only cares about the good of Bulgarian people, about progress, and suddenly there are people who condemn the party and want to put it in court. So let's please not sing with the choir of the state security in these statements. Thank you, Your Excellency. I didn't appoint Mr. General Semerji for my vice president. This was reviewed within the parliamentary group of the Union of Democratic Forces, alongside with the other opposition forces and parties. I was on my way of rejecting it, but other people from the parliamentary group of the Union of Democratic Forces were more flexible. And they said that Semerji would not have any rights under the Constitution. If the president doesn't assign him certain tasks, he will just be a puppet during the whole term of the presidency. Your Excellency, thank you. I think we've clarified this matter, we've answered. As really we are quite pressed with time.
شكرا. سأتحدث بالعربية. شكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For us, it was extremely beneficial to hear about your historical experience in your countries. I have a specific question now. As far as I'm aware, the state, in all these cases, did not give up implementing justice, even in the Romanian events, where everything was done in a few days. If the state refuses to implement justice, then the state immediately places the matters in the hands of the crowds, in the hands of the street. My question is the experience very varied and diverse, very different in the attempts to deprive the representatives of the old regime from taking positions in the new regime, and by depriving them of their human rights in this way? Were there any cases of depriving representatives of the old regimes from all their human rights, or did you only deprive them from taking part in the power, in the governance of the country?
Yeah, that gentleman over there hadn't got his questions answered, but I mean, anyway.
Oh. Okay. Okay, so yes, sir, over there. And confused.
Worried about everything.
صحفي وناشط سوري. حقيقة في الجلسة الماضية وفي الجلسة الحالية.
A Syrian journalist and activist. In the present and the past session, we could conclude that these Satanist forces called special services are responsible for all repressions and murders, political killings during all totalitarian regimes, which are characteristic with this, that these forces of Satan are responsible for everything. My question is, these forces, which like an octopus have penetrated all the levels of our society and have been destroying and have destroyed the very conscience of our society, how can these societies, these communities demand political responsibility and liability from these forces, and how can they purge themselves from the consequences and the presence of this satanic operator, because they could use all sorts of instruments and still penetrate and be present in the life of the society even nowadays. So what is the way for these societies who are striving for freedom? I envisage Syria here. Syria is ready to pay any price, any cost to attain its freedom. How could we achieve this? Thank you.
Murat Karayalçın from Turkey. I wonder what were the public prosecutors were doing in the process of reconciliation in South Africa and in those years in Romania and Bulgaria, in which they did not open their archives. Didn't they open at least any investigation all during those years? Thank you very much.
Yes, sir, over here.
شكرا. سأتكلم بالعربية.
I would like to make a remark and address Mrs. Osachi with it, and it is to do with the philosophy of justice, the very philosophy of justice. The question was posed as following. If you are forced to choose between peace and justice, would you choose peace or would you choose justice? I would ask you, Mrs. Osachi, the following question. Can't we formulate the same question slightly differently in order to base it on a different foundation, to try and think in a different way? How could we actually combine both peace and justice instead of choosing between them? Because social peace is based mostly and above all on political, economic, and social issues, and our two other main pillars, security and social justice. When people feel secure, when they are certain about their life, this creates conditions for having security. So peace and justice are not contradictory. We could have both, in my opinion. My question is, how could we start thinking in a different way, which will bring us to this positive way of thinking, provided that we have victims, people who died, both in Eastern Europe and in South America and the Arab world. Thank you very much. I hope I haven't bored you
anymore. So I've taken a lot of questions from this side. I'll take it from over here. I'm sorry. Yes, sir, over here.
Czarnogórski, Slovakia. We have heard about various forms of dealing with the past. That means about various forms of transitional justice in a narrow sense in various countries. And if we should now vote for the best form of dealing with the past, I want to say that I would vote for South Africa.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, colleagues.
I hope I'm going to get a chance to respond to His Excellency.
Go ahead. Yes.
No, right. Thank you for that. Well, I'm delighted to be able to respond to you. Thank you for that. I wanted to just catch up on a few aspects that were raised by, for instance, our Libyan friends as well. The speaker over there mentioned that you're dealing with 40 years, and how can we have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission after that? South Africa was dealing with 300 years of an oppressive system. Colonialism and apartheid oppressed the majority of South Africans who were black. And so I think we had quite a mountain to climb in this respect. Although we didn't have a revolution in the sense that you had a revolution in, for instance, Egypt and Libya and Tunisia, we had years and years of really a lot of beastliness happening, which we had to deal with. So I just wanted to make that point. What I wasn't able to do in my initial address because of time was really say more about our constitutional process, how we achieved a political settlement. It didn't happen overnight. 19 delegations sat down at a place and thrashed out the differences. At that point in the process, you needed leadership. You needed the leaders of the incoming government, which was clearly going to happen eventually, and the outgoing, to agree that they would do it in an orderly process. So you needed a legal framework for all this to happen. So you had a 3-year negotiation, or 2.5 years of negotiations. During this time, the government that was in power before handing over in a democratic election was assisted by transitional councils, so that representatives of the negotiators sat in councils with the government, and so the process was orderly. And the whole, it was terribly important, and I think a number of speakers have made this point, to have a legal framework for what was happening. We then thrashed out a constitution, and it dealt with the judiciary, it dealt with the rule of law, it dealt with the sort of main guidelines of the constitution, and it dealt with how we deal with the past, giving amnesty in terms of a process of truth-telling. That was the way we did it, and I went into detail there. I just want to say to the former Prime Minister of Slovakia that he mentioned that it was important to remove the judges. I said in my address we didn't have any illustration at all, and we actually didn't remove our judges. The judges remained, but they lustrated through age and retirement. And we had an independent commission which we established through our constitution to appoint the new judges. As we also appointed Parliament, the newly elected Parliament had hearings and appointed the Constitutional Court, which would deal with all constitutional issues. These were totally new people, so there was a balance created. As I said again, it was a framework we established in order to have a peaceful settlement. Just on the last point about the files were handed over. I mean, the files didn't get, well, there may have been a bit of shredding. There's a suspicion there was. But there was, as I said, these transitional councils kept an eagle eye on what the government that was still officially in power was doing. So the files are there, and they were taken over by the new government. And there was a transparency about the process in South Africa, which I did stress about the Truth Commission. I think the transparency is terribly important for any situation like this. So I do want to wish my colleagues in the north of Africa everything of the best, and I can see that the Libyans and the Syrians are wrestling with these issues, and all I can say is good luck to them.
Thank you. There's wonderful closing remarks.
Can I have just technical remarks?
Yes, I'm thinking about basically giving the floor to every one of you for closing remarks. I think that would be good. So, yes, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to point at removing of judges in Czechoslovakia. They were not removed, actually. Only those who has been lustrated. And I doubt whether it was good because, well, maybe not in Czechoslovakia or Czech Republic and Slovakia that much, but it is problem, for example, in Albania. It's enclave of past regime, definitely. And it really prevents people to get to justice. It is a problem, and if I could do it once again, I would probably remove them. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs.
Thank you. yes, huge dilemmas, and there is no answer. I mean, as you were saying, Professor, case by case, unfortunately, there is no better answer than that. But maybe from what I heard here, maybe we have a silver bullet. Because when I hear you gentlemen actually screaming injustice today, after 20 years, the victims of communism keep being made victims. They are being removed their voice, any possibility to express themselves in public, in the court, in books, to have a headquarters, to have a newspaper, to be heard, that we know what happened, we, the new generation. This is injustice added to injustice. What do we do then? And maybe the silver bullet is what the gentleman said, social justice. Maybe living well, as the Hungarians said, living well is the best revenge. Maybe we should all be able, or our people, to be able to live decent lives, decent economic lives, you know, schools and water, and to have the possibility to hear everyone, because then justice will come out. And I want to answer also globally your questions about investigations. Investigations are made. Judges have their trials in the open. Trials are public procedures. So if we are still there to hear them and to see what happens, the truth comes out in the end. But the end, when is the end? Again, my question, do we have to wait for them to die?
No.
I don't know. I'm sorry to say I don't know. I've been reading all philosophy of justice since Aristotle, and I'm still as torn as in the first day of my studies, in my 14th year of life. So
the struggle for democracy never ends.
The struggle for democracy never ends.
Definitely.
We have to fight for it every day. Well, life.
Yeah.
Life is like that.
That's true.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful remarks.
So my final remark will be also answering to the question about how can we overcome the heritage of the state security in this disintegration of communities. Certainly it's not an easy process. Certainly it is a process. Certainly it's a long process. Of course, important prerequisite is opening of the archives. This is very important because when you want to say something, you have to prove it somehow, and it's better if you can prove it by the archives. But how to say? I am optimistic, but it's a long process. It cannot happen from today to tomorrow. Even here, it's clear that 22 years after the beginning of Bulgarian transition, there is no such thing as overcoming of this heritage. So unfortunately, this heritage is not easy to be overcome. And finally, about reconciliation, of course, and I completely agree that reconciliation cannot be a single act. It is a process, and it is a very long process. But when I'm talking about reconciliation, I mean goodwill, meaning that we are part of one community, so we should contribute something to this community, and with our goodwill, of course.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you all for participation. It was a really, it's a difficult topic to speak. I'm sorry that I couldn't pick up all the questions that were raising because there were a lot of people that wanted to ask them, but we're, of course, we have the time, which is not limitless. I'd like to make a few words as of an ending, something I believe we all could unite over. It's in situations like this, is the most important thing is to ask the right questions if we want to get the right answers. There are two sides. It's the emotional, moral problem, and then we have the systematic problem. The emotional problem is how do we deal with justice? It's an answer that's not easily given. You cannot say what's been, it's been, let's move on. That's just not possible, and yet you can't keep living in the past because you have to move forward. And what we're suffering to this day, 20 years later, is actually the second part. Not the emotional so much, but the systematic. The fact is that the hidden networks, the hidden dependencies are still impairing our progress. And that's the right question to ask. How do we stop the old system from continuing affecting our lives 15, 20 years later? Justice and moral is one and needs to be found a solution for, but the most important solution is not to make the next generation pay for the mistakes of the current one. And that's something you should pick up from us as a lesson that we have learned. The fact is, this is what I started with. 22 years later, the new generation of politicians had to stand up in Parliament and defend the declaration condemning that past. It took 22 years so we can get to that point. If you can do this in 2 years instead of 22, you would have done the greatest of service for the next generation. And I think this is the lesson and something that's you should find a way to go through. Again, transparency, I believe, is the best way. It should be known who, what, and how. So that's my last words. And thank you for everyone's participation, and thank you everyone for that, for this afternoon.
I would ask you to keep the 15-minute limit for this coffee break in order to catch at least the dinner somehow on time. So I would be very grateful if we could do it 15 minutes. Thank you.